Do you believe people can really change? Or do they just get better at hiding things?
Before the rehearsal week even started, Lauren leaned across our mother's kitchen island with that little laugh she uses when she wants everyone to know she is joking and not joking at the same time and said, just loud enough for anyone within earshot to pretend they did not hear it, that I should please not pull a stunt like last time because she would really like her wedding to be about her. And while the old version of me would have taken the bait and fired back and then spent the rest of the night replaying it like a bad song, I swallowed it whole and let it sit there, because the fastest way to lose in my family is to look like you are trying to win, and I was done losing. I know how this sounds, like typical sisters who never grew up, but it is not that simple. In our house, Lauren was the announcement and I was the footnote. She was the framed photo on the mantle, and I was the stack of envelopes you move aside to dust. And that dynamic is not built in one afternoon, it is layered. Year after year, holiday after holiday, with 1,000 tiny comments about who is easier, who is reliable, who is polished, and who should really learn to read the room. When she said last time, she meant the engagement party where I told a story during my toast that I thought was affectionate and a little self-deprecating, and yes, it mentioned the time she borrowed my car for senior week and returned it with a suspicious dent and an even more suspicious explanation, and the room laughed, and she laughed too, until she did not. And afterwards she cried to our mother that I tried to humiliate her on her big night, and suddenly a story I told in love turned into the official family narrative that I derail milestones, which is funny, because I remember a lot of milestones where I was told to stand in the back so the color scheme would pop and the photos would be clean and the focus would be where it belonged. And that was never on me. You can call it rivalry if you want, but rivalry assumes both people are competing. I was just trying to breathe without being told I was taking up air. So when she flipped her hair and dropped that line, I smiled with all my teeth, because I have finally learned that nothing terrifies a bully like your willingness to be calm, and I said that of course I wanted her day to be perfect and that I would do whatever she needed. Which made our mother clap her hands and say, look at you two finally acting like adults, while Lauren gave me that slow blink that means she does not trust the words, but loves how they make her look in front of other people. Inside, I was not planning a scene. I was not planning to ruin anything. I was planning something much cleaner, because this was never about stealing her spotlight. This was about taking back the piece of myself that I kept handing over for approval that never came. And if that sounds dramatic, then maybe you have never been assigned a role in your own family and told to hit your mark and keep your voice down. The thing about being labeled messy is that you start to collect receipts, not the petty kind you wave around in group chats, the quiet kind you tuck away in your mind for the day you finally decide you are done apologizing for existing. I had remembered every time I was told to change my tone, every time my advice was labeled negative until Lauren repeated it and suddenly it was visionary, every time a joke at my expense landed because it was easier to laugh than to be the one who says, hey, that is not funny, and you know what? I was tired. I was tired of being the cautionary tale in a family that loves a narrative as long as it ends with Lauren shining and me learning a lesson about humility. So I went home and made tea and sat at my little table and opened my notebook. Yes, the one they called my drama diary back when they thought it was cute to minimize anything I took seriously, and I wrote one line, end it without ruining it. Then I underlined it, because my plan could not be loud or messy or vindictive. It had to be simple and undeniable and rooted in something bigger than a clapback. I am not going to pretend I did not feel a rush imagining her face when she realized the script had changed, but that was not the point. The point was that for once the story would not be about my mistake, it would be about my choice. I made one phone call that night, just one, to the only person whose yes mattered more than hers, and when they answered and let me finish, and then stayed quiet for a long breath before saying they were in, I put the kettle back on even though I still had half a mug left and stared at the wall with this calm I had not felt since before we learned to measure love and applause. Lauren wanted silence from me, and she was going to get it, just not the kind she expected, and if you think that sounds ominous, good, because by the time she walked down that aisle, the thing I had set in motion would already be past the point of being stopped. The week rolled forward in that familiar rhythm where group chats turn into little courtrooms and every message is a cross-examination. And even though I promised myself I would not get dragged into old patterns, the comments kept circling like fruit flies, harmless on their own and annoying in a swarm, with Lauren reminding everyone to keep things elegant and calm, and me tagged in a separate thread where her maid of honor, who likes to speak for her as if she were a press secretary, repeated that line about me not pulling a stunt like last time and suggested, with the politeness that has teeth, that maybe I should skip any toast and just focus on being low impact. Which I read twice and then again because low impact is how you describe a workout or a bumper crash, not a person you supposedly love, and I typed a reply, deleted it, typed another one, deleted that too. And finally wrote exactly one sentence that said I would respect any boundary that protects the day, then put my phone down and started doing the thing no one expected me to do, which was to handle the logistics like a professional rather than a walking hazard. I called the venue, not to ask for special treatment, but to ask clear questions, and when the coordinator heard my last name, she went quiet the way people do when they wonder if they are about to be pulled into a family storm. So I made it easy and told her I wanted to avoid drama and needed the kind of information that keeps people from tripping, which in my mind was both literal and not, and I asked about access points, side doors, aisle width, microphone placement, processional order, and whether there was a way to reserve a single seat without creating a turf war, and she answered carefully until I mentioned that a guest of mine might need a clean entrance that does not require the main aisle. At which point her voice softened because professionals know the difference between a diva request and an accommodation that matters. What I did not put in the chat, what I did not parade around for approval, was that the person whose yes I already had would only come if they could arrive without chaos and without the stare that says you are an interruption rather than a member of this family. So I asked the coordinator about a side door near the front, confirmed that a staffer could open it at a queue, and requested one reserved seat on the end of the front row, marked clearly with a note that said family, do not move, not because I wanted a badge of importance, but because some things need to be settled on paper before they are settled in hearts, and while she checked her notes I sat quietly with the kind of grin that is not joy so much as relief that the path exists. Meanwhile, the slow drip of small humiliations kept coming, with Lauren's future mother-in-law pulling me aside at a family dinner to suggest gently that I might enjoy a seat closer to the back, because the photographer needs space and the front rows are tight, and I let her finish the entire speech because her voice carries that syrupy authority people confuse with kindness, and then I said, calm and even, that the front row already includes one reserved seat for a guest under accessibility guidance, and that the venue coordinator has it in writing, and I watched her face do that polite recalculation people do when they realize they cannot move something that is anchored to a rule they are not willing to argue against in public. I wish I could tell you I felt triumphant in that moment, but what I actually felt was a strange quiet, because for the first time in years I was not begging for a place, I was confirming one. And while the table chatter rolled on about centerpieces and playlists and whether the flower girl would remember to walk, I sat there knowing that a seat with my name on it was not about prestige. It was about a door that would open for someone who had been kept out of too many rooms, and that thought steadied me more than any pep talk ever could. Later that night, the maid of honor sent a new message reminding everyone that the aisle should be kept clear for photos and that anyone arriving late should slip in quietly at the back. And I read it with that long, slow breath you take when someone tries to write rules after you have already filed the paperwork. And I replied that our coordinator has arranged a simple exception for one guest and that I would handle the timing directly with staff so no one else has to worry about it. And then I put the phone on silent and made a second list in my notebook, the kind that turns nerves into bulletproof glass, with 3 items only: confirm the queue, confirm the door, confirm the seat. The next morning, Lauren called with her cheerful voice that is really a warning and asked whether I had anything I needed to tell her, because she had heard snippets about special arrangements and would hate to be surprised, and I said, steady and warm, That the only surprise I was planning was making sure the day ran smoothly and that I had handled a minor access detail so a family member could attend without fuss, and I waited for the explosion that did not come because she cannot afford to be the person who fights accessibility in front of a coordinator who takes notes and a fiancé who wants peace, so she pivoted into a lecture about not seeking attention, and I let her talk until she ran out of air. And when she finally asked if I was going to be low impact like we discussed, I said I would be almost invisible until the moment I needed to be seen, which she took as reassurance and I took as the cleanest promise I could make, because the first small piece of my plan had clicked into place without raised voices or territory battles, and while it looked like nothing to everyone else, it felt like the first quiet win that would make the big one possible. The rehearsal dinner landed like one of those orchestrated family performances where everyone knows their lines and, if anyone dares improvise, the director clears her throat and the orchestra swells to drown it out. And I walked in already wearing the kind of calm you only find after you decide that you do not need the room to like you in order to be the grown-up in it. Which turned out to be a good call because within a handful of toasts Lauren's maid of honor had circled to the microphone with her sing-song delivery and told a tidy little anecdote about memories best left in the group chat that landed squarely on me, and then Lauren, sensing the room's appetite for another round, chimed in with that carefully casual voice and said she loved me very much and knew I would keep it simple this time because we all remembered what happened last time, and the table laughed the polite laugh people use when they want to belong to the winning side. And I felt that old heat crawl up my chest and stop at my throat, except instead of boiling over I took a sip of water and let the silence do the work because silence, if you hold it long enough, becomes a mirror and people start to hear themselves. I watched faces tilt toward me, waiting for the scene they have rehearsed in their heads 100 times, and I did not give it to them, which threw the timing off just enough that Lauren rushed to fill the space with another quip about me being a wild card. And I smiled in that slow way that says I will not fight you here because I do not need to, and I turned back to my plate and asked the caterer about the lemon chicken, as if that moment were not the latest entry in a scrapbook of small public digs that everyone pretends are jokes, and in that tiny act of not performing, I felt the plan settle in my bones like a hinge finding its groove. After dessert, when people broke off into little clumps to replay the greatest hits of our childhood, Lauren cornered me with the maid of honor hovering nearby like a backup singer. And she said she hoped I understood why she had to say something because she loves me, but she also loves peace, and she needed me to promise again that I would not make the day about me, and I held her gaze until she remembered she is not actually my supervisor, and then I told her I would be almost invisible until the one moment I needed to be seen, which she heard as compliance, and I held as a boundary, and yes, I know that phrasing sounds like I was playing with fire, but sometimes the only way to stop being the family's designated problem is to speak in sentences that do not bend just because someone calls them difficult. What none of them realized, and what I had no intention of clarifying for people who have never once asked what I needed without adding a condition, was that the moment I was reserving for visibility had nothing to do with stealing a spotlight and everything to do with opening a door for someone who had been kept outside of it for too long. And if my voice went a little tight when I imagined that door actually opening, it was because I could still hear the years when that name could not be spoken without a fight, when the safest option was to pretend history did not exist, because pretending felt easier than acknowledging the mess that came with it, and yet the mess never really left. It just sat in the corner wearing a nice blazer and nodding along to speeches about forgiveness that never included me. The staff queue was set, the side entrance confirmed, the single reserved seat labeled as family so clearly that even the most enthusiastic usher would not dare reassign it, and I had repeated the instructions to the coordinator until we both could have drawn the map with our eyes closed, which meant that the only variable left was the person who had once been the center of our family's gravity and then was pushed so far to the margins that new people could join our story without even knowing there had ever been a different layout. I stepped outside for a breath that was not for show and called to check on timing, and when I heard the steadiness on the other end, not giddy, not angry, just steady in a way that made me stand up straighter, I understood that this was not some petty stunt dressed up as virtue. This was a correction, A quiet rebalancing that would not break the day, but would absolutely break the habit of pretending that absence equals closure. And I thank them for trusting me with it, because trust is not a word we get to throw around carelessly anymore. When I came back in, the fiancé's mother gave me a look like she wanted to ask for details, and then thought better of it, because people who live on tidy narratives do not like to hold unfamiliar threads, and Lauren, feeling the shift without understanding it, looped her arm through mine and said we were good, right, and I told her we were as good as we were going to be, which landed gently enough that she stopped analyzing it. Later, as we hugged good night, she leaned in and whispered that she would know if I tried anything, and I almost laughed, because the whole point was that she would not know a thing until it was already happening, and even then she would not recognize it as mine. She would only feel the room move. And the room would move because something that never should have been exiled was going to take its seat without bowing to anyone's version of the past, and if that sounds like a threat, then you have never seen a family held hostage by a story that leaves out the inconvenient characters, which is why when I turned my key in my front door later that night and placed my dress on the chair and laid my phone face down, I felt not adrenaline but clarity. Because the final piece was not convincing anyone, it was keeping my mouth shut long enough for the cue to arrive and the door to swing open. By the morning of the ceremony, I had reached that steady, almost clinical headspace where you stop trying to negotiate with people's expectations and simply execute the plan you designed when no one was watching. Which turned out to be exactly what I needed, because my mother was already on her third check-in before breakfast, speaking in that careful tone that sounds loving on speakerphone and controlling up close, asking whether I remembered to keep my hair simple and my words simpler, and whether I could help seat a few distant relatives near the back, and I told her, in one long breath that left no room for interruption, that I would help wherever needed after I confirmed a small access arrangement the coordinator had already approved. And I heard the brief silence that follows a phrase people do not want to challenge in public, after which she pivoted to napkins and timelines and thankfully let it go. The truth I had not volunteered to anyone outside a tiny circle was that the guest, whose arrival I had built the entire logistics around, was my father. The same father who had been slowly and efficiently written out of our family's working script after the divorce. The man who had done the hard work of getting sober and then had a small stroke that made stairs and narrow aisles a negotiation. The man Lauren insisted would be a distraction because people might feel awkward, which is a polite way of saying she did not want the untidy history of how we got here standing anywhere near the polished future she was staging. I had kept a quiet relationship with him for years, the kind where holidays are phone calls because invitations come with conditions. And after that rehearsal dinner, I decided I would not sit through another milestone pretending absence equals peace. The coordinator and I had refined the cue so precisely that I could have diagrammed it blindfolded, agreeing that the side door near the front would crack open during the third prelude song while guests were still shuffling and whispering, that a staffer would meet him at the curb and walk him down the short, clean pathway that avoids every step, and that the end seat in the front row, labeled plainly with a card that read "Family, do not move," would be waiting, which meant that no usher with a headset and a smile could reroute him to the back under the pretense of better flow. I had sent the wording for that card myself, not because I enjoy paperwork, but because ink changes behavior in a way pleading never has. The maid of honor tried one last nudge in the group thread with a friendly reminder about keeping the aisle open and latecomers sliding in the back. And I responded exactly once with a sentence that referenced the coordinator's approved accommodation and offered to manage the timing personally so no one else had to worry. After which I muted the thread and called my father to go over the timing one more time, and when he said he would be there early because the only thing that still rattled him was being rushed in front of strangers. Something inside me unclenched in a way I do not think anyone in that family has ever seen. A half hour before guests began arriving, the fiancé found me by the coat room with the wary kindness of a man who senses there is a moving part he does not understand and would prefer not to be crushed by. And he asked if there was anything he should know that would keep the day smooth, and I told him, with the simplicity of a decision already paid for, that someone important to me would be seated quietly in the front by staff, and that there would be no speeches and no drama, only a correction. we should have made years ago, and to his credit he nodded and said he trusted me, which I chose to believe was not just diplomacy but instinct, because a person who wants a good marriage learns how to recognize when a woman is cleaning up a mess she did not make. 10 minutes later, the maid of honor reached for the reserved card like she was straightening it and tried to pocket it, and the coordinator appeared from nowhere with that professional smile, which says I am documented and therefore immovable, replacing the card and then adding a piece of tape for good measure, while explaining that accessibility signage is not optional. And I stood 3 steps away pretending to check my phone while feeling a private surge that was not gloating so much as quiet vindication, because there is a kind of revenge that does not require fire, only paperwork and nerve. When my father's message arrived that simply said he was at the curb and ready when I was, I stepped into the side corridor that runs along the sanctuary wall, sent the single word now to the staffer who had been waiting with the door badge in hand, and listened as the prelude shifted into that third piece we had picked precisely because it creates a soft swell that covers a small entrance without turning it into an announcement, and as the latch clicked and the door opened just wide enough for us to pass, I took his arm, felt the weight of years that should not have been empty, and moved forward into the space they once told me I had no right to claim, knowing that by the time anyone realized what was happening it would already be done, and there would be nothing to argue with because the seat was reserved, the card was signed, the door was legal, and the only sound that mattered would be the room recognizing what had finally been repaired. The moment the door closed softly behind us and the swell of the music absorbed the sound, I realized that no one in that packed sanctuary had prepared themselves for what they were about to witness. Because in their version of the story, my father was a ghost who existed only in whispers and cautionary tales, a figure trimmed out of photographs and edited from speeches so cleanly that entire branches of family no longer remembered the details. And yet here he was, walking at my side with measured steps, his posture imperfect but steady, his eyes forward, and with each step toward that reserved seat the oxygen in the room shifted, because people recognized him instantly. And the polite murmurs that had been filling the space just moments earlier drained into silence that was louder than any applause could have been. I kept my head level, not smiling, not daring to offer anything that might look like triumph, because this was not about rubbing salt into wounds, it was about forcing the truth into the open air where no one could pretend it did not exist, and in that silence every pair of eyes found us, processing the reality that the family narrative they had clung to was now unraveling at the edges. We reached the front row, and when I guided him into the chair marked with that unmistakable card, a simple piece of cardstock that carried the weight of years of exile, something happened that no amount of planning could have fully anticipated. People began to clap. Not politely the way you do when someone finishes a song or a speech, but fully and spontaneously, like the room understood in one shared instant that an injustice had just been corrected, and they were relieved to be present for it. The applause rolled through the sanctuary like a wave, and then, as if led by some unseen conductor, guests rose from their seats until the standing ovation stretched from the front pews to the very back rows. A roar of approval so undeniable that even the most committed loyalists to the old narrative had no choice but to stand with everyone else. I stood beside my father, steadying him as he adjusted, and in that sound I heard more than applause. I heard the years of silence being punctured, the years of looking the other way being rewritten, and above it all I felt the clean break of a chain I had carried too long. I did not look at Lauren immediately, not because I was afraid of her reaction, but because I wanted her to sit in it, to feel the ground shift before she had the chance to arrange her face, and when I finally turned my eyes toward her, I saw what I had been waiting for, the flash of confusion hardening into shock, the smile faltering at the edges, the calculation in her eyes stalling, because there was nothing in her script for this moment. She had prepared for outbursts, for jokes that landed wrong, for any behavior she could frame as sabotage, but she had not prepared for grace, for the kind of entrance that required no words and yet commanded the room, for the kind of applause that could not be dismissed as pity because it was earned, raw, and collective. Her lips parted, but no words came, and the smirk she wore so effortlessly when she teased me dissolved in real time, replaced with the stiff stillness of someone who has finally been outmaneuvered in front of her own audience. The officiant, rattled but professional, cleared his throat and tried to move the program forward, but the applause lingered longer than any of us expected, and when it finally softened, the room did not return to the same rhythm. Something permanent had shifted. My father sat there quietly, eyes damp but proud, his hand resting on the arm of the chair as though it were an anchor he had been denied for too long, and for the first time in decades, he was not the missing figure in the background but a present, undeniable part of the family story, restored not by apology or permission, but by my refusal to accept the erasure any longer. I sat down beside him, not in defiance, but in solidarity, and the weight of what had just occurred settled into me with a calm that no victory dance could match, because this was not the chaos they expected from me. This was order, delivered in a way that silenced every whisper of stunt and replaced it with the word they would never have given me on: their own respect. When Lauren finally walked down the aisle, her entrance looked exactly as polished as she had rehearsed, her gown pristine, her smile practiced, her posture perfect. But the room did not react the way she had dreamed, because no matter how flawless the choreography, no matter how carefully staged the tableau, everyone had already witnessed the real moment of the day, the one that had redefined the air in the sanctuary, and nothing could eclipse it. She reached the front, placed her bouquet with mechanical precision, and avoided my eyes, because she knew, as did everyone else, that her earlier dig about not pulling a stunt like last time had just collapsed under the weight of reality. And the silence she wanted from me had become something else entirely, a silence that did not shrink me but amplified me, a silence that forced her to stand under the weight of her own words. I leaned slightly toward my father and whispered that he was right where he belonged, and he squeezed my hand without looking at me, because he did not need to, and I understood that this was not just my revenge or my moment, but his as well. A shared reclamation of dignity that had been denied to both of us in different ways. As the ceremony moved forward, I let the calm wash over me, knowing that the ovation was still echoing in every mind in that room, including Lauren's, and that nothing she could say or do would erase the fact that, on the day she thought she had scripted down to the last detail, it was my entrance that people would remember, and it was her silence, not mine, that carried the weight of defeat. She had wanted me invisible, but instead I had made presence itself my statement, and in the end, I did not need to raise my voice, because the standing ovation had spoken louder than I ever could.